They called him Isiah, the master carpenter of the Ward plantation. His hands built the very house that chained his people. And yet, those same hands carved a secret meant to kill. In a bedroom lined with carved roses and prayers, he hid a trap no one could see, a weapon disguised as beauty. Ephraim Ward, the planter who sold Isaiah's wife away, never feared the bed he boasted. He never saw the silent rage in every joint and seam, or the careful patience of a man denied justice. And when the canopy came crashing down, the master died in his own house, in the very room Isiah built for him. But the death was only the beginning. Because once a house tastes blood, it demands a reckoning. This is the story of the slave carpenter who planted a deadly trap in the master's bedroom and left him to die in his own house, and how one man's craft turned vengeance into legend. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. Morning sunlight filtered through the master bedroom windows of the Ward plantation, casting long golden fingers across the polished oak floors. Ephraim Ward stood in the center of the room, his silk waistcoat tight against his growing belly, gesturing with dramatic sweeps of his arms at the massive canopy bed that dominated the space. You see this bed, Isiah? Fine craftsmanship once, but now— He ran his fingers along a worn post, lips curling in disgust. Now it's an embarrassment. The Wilkersons just imported a new four-poster from Charleston. The Hendersons have French carvings on theirs. His voice rose with each comparison. My house must outshine my rivals. Every detail matters. Isiah Cole stood quietly, hands clasped before him, his expression carefully blank. At 32, his strong carpenter's hands showed the scars of 15 years of skilled labor. His eyes, however, revealed nothing as the master continued. I want scrollwork, rosettes at each corner. The canopy itself needs to be higher, more grand. Ephraim paced the room, something that makes people gasp when they enter, something worthy of my position. Yes, sir, Isiah said, his voice steady. How soon would you like the work completed? 2 weeks. We're hosting the parish's most important families for the spring gathering. Ephraim straightened his cuffs. Spare no effort. Use the best wood we have. Isiah nodded and moved toward the bed to examine it more closely. He circled the massive structure, noting the joints and supports. When he knelt to inspect the frame's underside, his heart stopped. There, reinforcing the rail, was a chain. Not just any chain, but one with distinctive links, 3 narrow, 1 wide, repeating in a pattern. Isiah would know it anywhere. It was the very chain that had once bound his wife Rebecca's wrists before she was sold downriver 4 years ago. The memory flooded back with crushing force. Rebecca's tears, the way her hands had trembled as the chains bit into her skin. The auctioneer's voice calling out prices. The final moment when she'd looked back at him, her eyes holding his until the wagon took her around the bend. Isaiah's fingers touched the metal, cold despite the warm room. His grief mingled with fury, so intense it momentarily blinded him. He forced a deep breath, then another. Something wrong with the frame? Ephraim asked impatiently. No, sir, Isiah managed, his voice miraculously steady. Just checking how it's constructed. Well, don't waste time. I have the banker coming next week to discuss new loans. Everything must be perfect. Isiah stood, brushing dust from his knees. I'll need to take measurements. Draw up a plan for your approval. Fine, fine, Ephraim waved dismissively. Just make sure it's impressive. The Wards have stood in this parish for 3 generations. Our bedroom should reflect that legacy. As Ephraim moved toward the veranda doors, Isiah noticed something on the floor near the threshold. Several small clumps of dried mud. Boot prints, partially wiped, but still visible. They led from the veranda toward the hallway, not following the master's current path. Isiah recognized their meaning immediately. Deputy Silas Pike's nocturnal visits. The lawman came at least twice monthly, always after dark, always leaving with something tucked in his coat. Isiah had seen him from the quarters once, moving like a shadow across the lawn toward the kitchen entrance. Everyone knew Pike collected more than just taxes, bribes, favors, information, whatever kept his pockets full and his power secure. The mud told Isiah that Pike had been here last night, likely collecting payment for some service rendered or overlooked. "I'll expect a sketch by tomorrow," Ephraim said, turning back. "Make it worthy of envy." "Yes, sir," Isiah replied, his mind already calculating angles and weights, possibilities, and pressures. After Ephraim left, Isiah remained alone in the bedroom. He moved methodically, measuring the height of posts, the span between them, the thickness of supports. His hands worked with practiced precision, while his thoughts churned with darker purpose. He lifted the chain slightly, feeling its weight. Rebecca had been small, barely 5 feet tall. The chain had seemed so heavy on her delicate wrists. Now it served as support for the master's comfort, an obscene repurposing that made Isaiah's stomach turn. Through the open veranda doors, he could hear Ephraim's voice carrying across the lawn, boasting to the overseer about planned improvements to the property. Always appearances, always what others would think. Isiah moved to the windows, where cotton curtains hung in heavy folds. He examined their mounting, the way they draped, adding each detail to his mental inventory. Every element could serve a purpose, some visible, some hidden. That evening, Isiah sat alone in his carpentry shed. A single lamp cast warm light over his workbench, where a small slate lay before him. With practiced strokes, he sketched the bed's outline, then added details: posts, rails, canopy. His chalk circled the canopy frame repeatedly, marking stress points and supports. He drew cross-sections, calculating loads and balances with the precision that had made him valuable property. On the bench beside him lay the chain. He'd quietly removed it, telling the house servant he needed it for measurements. Tomorrow he would replace it with another, keeping this one as a template. His fingers traced the alternating links, 3 narrow, 1 wide, feeling each cold curve of metal. "Rebecca," he whispered, his voice barely disturbing the night air. The name carried years of loss, of prayers spoken into darkness, of rage carefully contained. He looked again at his drawings, at the elegant design taking shape beneath his hands. The master wanted something to display his status, his power, his dominance, something to make visitors gasp. Isaiah's chalk moved deliberately, adding hidden details between the visible ones, places where weight could shift, where pressure could multiply, where ornament could conceal purpose. He looked at the chain again and whispered his wife's name, silently resolving to turn the master's vanity into his downfall. Morning dew still clung to the grass as Isiah made his way to the carpentry shed, carrying his tools wrapped in a worn cloth bundle. The plantation was already alive with activity. Field hands moving toward the cotton rows, kitchen smoke rising against the pale sky, the overseer's voice carrying across the yard. Inside the carpentry shed, Isiah unwrapped his tools and laid them out in precise order. Chisels from smallest to largest, planes arranged by purpose, saws hanging on their designated pegs. Order was his anchor in a world where so much remained beyond his control. He selected a length of oak and began to mark it, the chalk line snapping crisp and true. Soon the shed filled with the steady rhythm of work, the scrape of planes smoothing rough surfaces, the bite of saws cutting along measured lines, the tap-tap-tap of mallets driving joints together. Jonah arrived as Isiah was sizing timber for the bedposts. At 17, Jonah was all restless energy and quick movements, his lean frame still growing into a man's strength. His dark eyes held a fire that worried Isiah, a burning that hadn't yet learned to hide itself. "Morning," Jonah said, shrugging off his jacket. Without waiting for instruction, he picked up a plane and set to work on a board Isiah had marked. "Need you to help me with these rosettes today," Isiah said, pointing to sketches pinned to the wall. "Master wants 8 of them, identical, for the corners." Jonah frowned at the elaborate design. "More fancy work for the big house while our cabins leak?" "The work keeps us useful," Isiah replied quietly, "and being useful keeps us here, not sold off." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Both knew what sold off really meant: families torn apart, like Isiah's had been. The younger man's shoulders dropped slightly as he nodded. They worked in companionable silence for a time, the only sounds the rasp of tools and the distant calls of field workers. Through the open door, they could see slaves moving between the cotton fields and barns, their bodies already bent with the day's labor. When Isiah was certain no one was near, he pulled out his slate and set it on the workbench. "Come see what I'm planning," he said, his voice low. Jonah wiped sawdust from his hands and moved closer. Isiah's drawings showed the bed's canopy from multiple angles, with detailed sections of the corner joints. "Master wants decoration everywhere," Isiah explained, his finger tracing the design. "Carved panels on the headboard, scroll work along every edge, rosettes at each corner." He tapped one of the corner joints. "All that fancy work gives us cover." "Cover for what?" Jonah asked, leaning closer. Isiah flipped the slate over, revealing a more technical drawing, a cross-section of the canopy frame showing an unusual joint design. "This is what no one will see," Isiah said, his voice barely above a whisper. "A mortise joint here, load-bearing, but not fixed. Every night, Master shifts this decorative pin before sleeping. He's particular about the canopy hanging just so." He pointed to a small lever disguised as an ornamental finial. "When he adjusts it, it looks like he's just setting it straight. But if I build it my way," he drew his finger along the hidden mechanism in the drawing, "the load shifts, the mortise slips, the canopy collapses, not just falls, but drives down. These rails here?" He indicated what appeared to be decorative supports. "They're hollow. Cords inside. They'll tighten like snares. And these carved rosettes hide spikes that will drive down with the weight." Jonah's eyes widened as understanding dawned. "You're building a trap," he whispered, equal parts amazed and frightened. "I'm building a bed," Isiah corrected carefully. "How it functions is a matter of design." Jonah stared at the drawings, then at the timber they'd been shaping. His voice dropped even lower. "Fire would be quicker. One torch in the gin house and we all burn," Isiah cut him off sharply. "Fire kills all, not one. Fire brings militia from 3 parishes. Fire means children sold south, and men hanging from trees." He covered the slate with a cloth. "This way, it's an accident. A poorly built bed that collapsed. Bad luck, not murder." Jonah looked unconvinced, but nodded slowly. "And the mistress? She sleeps in the small bedroom when the master drinks, which is most nights," Isiah said. "She'll find him in the morning." They returned to their work, the shed filling once more with the sounds of creation. Isiah selected special pieces of wood for the critical components, testing each for strength and flexibility. For the visible parts, he chose handsome oak and walnut that would take a polish well. For the hidden mechanism, hickory and ash, woods that would bear weight without bending but snap cleanly when overloaded. By midday, Isiah had assembled a crude prototype on a scrap frame, a small version of the corner joint with its concealed mechanism. He positioned it carefully on the workbench, away from the door. "Watch," he told Jonah, placing a heavy iron weight on the test joint. Nothing happened. Then Isiah reached out and shifted a small wooden pin, seemingly adjusting an ornamental element. For a moment, the structure held. Then came a clean snap, quick and decisive, as the joint failed precisely as designed. The weight dropped, driving a small spike through a block of pine below. The sound, though not loud, made them both freeze. Isiah quickly disassembled the test piece, sliding the components into a drawer beneath the workbench. Footsteps approached outside, the distinctive stride of polished boots on packed earth. Jonah grabbed a broom and began sweeping sawdust over the workbench, covering the chalk marks Isiah had made. Isiah picked up a chisel and began shaping a rosette, his hands steady despite the pounding in his chest. Jonah's face was a mixture of fear and awe, his eyes darting to the closed drawer that held the prototype. He looked shaken but impressed by what he had witnessed, the precision of death disguised as craftsmanship. Ephraim Ward appeared in the doorway, his imposing figure blocking the sunlight. He surveyed the workshop with the casual entitlement of ownership, nodding approvingly at the timber being shaped. "Fine workmanship, Isiah," he said, picking up one of the partially carved rosettes. "This is exactly the quality I expect. The banker will be most impressed when he sees my new bedroom suite." "Thank you, sir," Isiah replied, his face a perfect mask of deference. "It will be worthy of the Ward name." "See that it is," Ephraim said, setting the rosette down. "I've invited half the parish to view it when it's finished." He smiled, revealing teeth stained by tobacco. "Nothing like making the neighbors green with envy, is there?" "No, sir," Isiah agreed, his hands continuing their careful work on the wood, shaping beauty that concealed purpose. Late afternoon sunlight slanted through the windows of the master bedroom, casting long shadows across the half-finished bed frame. Isiah stood beside his work, wiping sweat from his brow with a cloth, as he heard the measured footsteps of Mrs. Temperance Ward approaching. The mistress of the plantation entered the room with her back straight and chin lifted. Her dark dress rustled softly as she moved, the fabric expensive but modest in its cut. Her hair was pulled back severely beneath a lace cap that spoke of both wealth and restraint. "Isiah," she said, her voice carrying the practiced gentleness that never quite reached her eyes, "how is the progress on my husband's bed?" "Coming along well, ma'am," Isiah replied, his gaze appropriately lowered. "The frame is assembled. I'm working on the canopy supports and ornamental pieces now." Mrs. Ward circled the bed, running her fingers along the polished wood. Her inspection was thorough, as it always was. Nothing in her household escaped her attention, a fact that made Isiah's plan all the more dangerous. "The craftsmanship is acceptable," she finally declared, the faint praise all she would offer. Isiah nodded, keeping his face carefully blank. "Thank you, ma'am." She paused at the foot of the bed, her pale fingers tapping lightly on the wood. "I require an addition to the design." Isiah waited silently, knowing better than to ask questions. "I wish for a kneeler," she said, moving to the side of the bed. "Here, beneath this section, hidden from view, but accessible when the bed curtains are drawn." Isiah blinked in surprise. "A kneeler, ma'am?" "For prayer, Isiah," she said with a touch of impatience. "A proper Christian woman must have a place for private devotion, especially in times of difficulty." Her voice had dropped slightly on the last word, her eyes darting toward the door as if checking for her husband's presence. "I understand, ma'am. I can build it into the frame here," Isiah said, kneeling to indicate the spot. His mind was already calculating how this would affect his mechanism, the angles and tensions that would need adjustment. "It must be completely concealed," Mrs. Ward insisted. Mr. Ward would not appreciate such additions. A small frown crossed her face, and she pressed her hand to her chest, coughing lightly. "These palpitations," she murmured, more to herself than to Isiah. "The doctor says it's my nerves, but I know better." Isiah remained silent, his eyes on the floor. The mistress's health complaints were common knowledge among the house slaves. Sister Miriam often mimicked Mrs. Ward's theatrical sighs and hand-pressing in the privacy of the quarters. Mrs. Ward reached into her dress pocket and withdrew a small, leather-bound book. "This is where I keep my most private prayers," she said, placing it near the bed rail. "No one knows of this book, not even Mr. Ward." Her voice carried a warning. She knelt awkwardly beside the bed, opened the book, and began to pray in a low voice. Lord, give me strength to bear my burdens with grace. Let me be an example of Christian forbearance in the face of trials. Isiah stood respectfully to the side, his eyes taking in the scene. The kneeler would force him to adjust the entire mechanism. The pull cords would need rerouting, the trigger points relocated. But as he watched Mrs. Ward pray, a new possibility formed in his mind. The devotional motifs she would surely want carved into the kneeler would provide perfect concealment for the pulleys. Her piety would become his cover. Mrs. Ward finished her prayer and rose stiffly to her feet. I will expect the kneeler to be in place when the bed is completed, she said, retrieving her prayer book. And Isiah, her eyes fixed on his with unusual intensity. This remains between us. Yes, ma'am, Isiah said. No one will know. She nodded, seemingly satisfied, then coughed again, her hand fluttering to her chest. These spells grow worse by the day, she muttered. Perhaps when the banker visits next week, Mr. Ward's mood will improve. With that cryptic comment, she turned and left the room. Isiah immediately knelt and examined the space beneath the bed frame. The kneeler would need to be sturdy enough to bear weight, yet conceal the mechanism's components. He took measurements with a piece of string, committing the numbers to memory. The mistress's request had complicated his plan, but it had also provided unexpected opportunities. The carvings she would expect, crosses, doves, olive branches, would offer perfect hiding places for the small pulleys and guide hooks his trap required. He worked until the light began to fade, adapting his design. When a house slave came to light the lamps, Isiah gathered his tools and headed back to the carpentry shed. His mind filled with calculations and adjustments. The shed was warm from the day's heat, the air heavy with the scent of fresh-cut wood and resin. Isiah lit a lamp and spread his drawings on the workbench, making new sketches to accommodate the kneeler. He worked with focused intensity, planing pieces for the devotional panels that would hide his deadly purpose. Each rosette and scroll was carefully hollowed to conceal a portion of the mechanism. Each decorative pin was shaped to serve as a trigger point. The work was precise, demanding all his skill and concentration. Night had fully descended when Jonah appeared in the doorway, a dark silhouette against the starlit sky. "You're still at it," Jonah said, leaning against the door frame. "Everyone's wondering where you are." "Almost done," Isiah replied, not looking up from the joint he was fitting. "The mistress wants a prayer kneeler built into the frame." Jonah snorted softly. "Praying for forgiveness while sleeping in a bed built by men she owns?" Isiah said nothing, but his hands paused briefly before continuing their work. Jonah watched him for a long moment, then asked in a low voice, "Will this truly bring justice, Isiah? One man's death for all we've suffered?" Isiah finally looked up, his face half illuminated by the lamplight. His eyes held a depth of pain and purpose that made him look older than his years. "By morning," he whispered, "the house itself will bear witness." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with promise and danger. Jonah straightened, nodding slowly as if accepting both the plan and its consequences. Isiah returned to his work, his hands steady as they shaped wood into both art and vengeance. The lamp flickered, casting dancing shadows across the walls of the shed as night deepened around the plantation. The sky darkened as Isiah fitted the last decorative panel onto the canopy bed. Every ornament, every carved flourish now concealed a piece of his deadly mechanism. He tested the bed frame one final time, pressing his hand against what appeared to be a simple ornamental pin. The mechanism remained locked, waiting for its trigger. "You've outdone yourself," Ephraim Ward declared, appearing in the doorway earlier than expected. He swayed slightly, the smell of whiskey following him into the room. "Finished just in time. I've been boasting about this masterpiece all afternoon." Isiah stepped back, bowing his head. "Yes, sir. It's complete. Ephraim circled the bed, running his hand along the polished wood and ornate carvings. "Such craftsmanship deserves praise," he said, his words slightly slurred. "I'll be the envy of every planter in the parish." "Thank you, sir," Isiah replied, his voice carefully neutral. "You may go," Ephraim said, with a dismissive wave. "I've had quite the successful day. The banker has all but guaranteed the loan." Isiah gathered his tools, moving unhurriedly. "I noticed the hinge on the hallway cabinet is loose. I should fix it before I leave for the night." Ephraim wasn't listening. He was already tugging at his cravat, humming to himself as he prepared for bed. Isiah stepped into the hallway, closing the bedroom door most of the way, but leaving it slightly ajar. He knelt beside the hallway cabinet, tools in hand, positioned to hear and see through the narrow opening. Through the crack, he watched as Ephraim poured himself another drink from the crystal decanter on the dresser. The planter gulped it down, then began to undress, tossing his fine clothes carelessly onto a chair. "Told Harrison his cotton will never match mine," Ephraim muttered to himself, smiling at his reflection in the mirror. "And Montgomery? That fool thought I wouldn't notice his wife's jewelry was paste." He laughed loudly, the sound echoing off the walls. Isiah worked on the cabinet hinge, his movements slow and deliberate. His heart beat steadily in his chest, not fast with fear, not slow with doubt, just beating, marking time as it moved toward the moment he had planned for weeks. Ephraim, now in his nightshirt, approached the bed. He ran his hand lovingly over the canopy frame, admiring the craftsmanship. "Worth every penny," he declared to the empty room. Then he climbed heavily onto the mattress, the bed frame creaking under his weight. Isiah's hands stilled on the cabinet. His breath caught in his throat as he watched through the crack in the door. Ephraim settled against the pillows, reaching up to adjust the canopy. It was a habit Isiah had observed during his work. The master always shifted the decorative pin at the corner of the canopy before settling in to sleep. He claimed it kept the mosquito netting properly draped. "Perfect," Ephraim murmured, his fingers closing around the ornamental pin. Isiah pressed himself against the wall, his eyes fixed on the narrow view through the doorway. Ephraim turned the pin, a simple, casual gesture he had performed countless times before. The sound began as a soft click, almost imperceptible, followed by the whisper of cords sliding through hidden pulleys. Then came the sharp crack of wood, giving way under sudden strain. Ephraim looked up, confusion replacing smugness on his face. "What?" The canopy collapsed with shocking force. Hidden spikes drove downward, their paths disguised by the ornamental carvings. Cords tightened, pulling the bed frame inward from all sides. Ephraim's cry was cut brutally short, a startled gasp transforming into a choked gurgle. The sound of splintering wood covered any other noise as the beautiful bed transformed into a deadly trap. Then silence fell, complete, sudden silence. Isiah remained motionless in the hallway, his back pressed against the wall. His tools lay forgotten beside the cabinet. He closed his eyes, listening to the silence of the house. The grandfather clock in the foyer ticked steadily. Somewhere in the kitchen, a pot clattered as the cook prepared for tomorrow. Outside, night insects began their chorus. The plantation continued its rhythms, unaware that its master lay dead. Isiah opened his eyes. His breathing was steady, his hands no longer trembling. The deed was done. Justice, or vengeance, had been served through the very craft Ephraim had praised. He should leave now, return to the quarters, be seen playing checkers with the others when the alarm was raised. That had been his plan. But his feet wouldn't move. Something held him there, listening to the silence from the bedroom. Was it regret? No. He felt no regret for Ephraim Ward. Was it fear? Perhaps, but not the panicked fear of discovery. It was something else, a need to witness, to confirm that the architecture of his revenge had been fulfilled. The house creaked and settled around him, the old timbers adjusting to the cooling night air. Isiah leaned against the wall, letting the solid structure support him as his body suddenly felt heavy with the weight of what he had done. Minutes passed. No cry of alarm came from Mrs. Ward. No servant ventured upstairs to check on the master. The house remained quiet, as if holding its breath. Then Isiah heard it. Footsteps. Not the light, measured steps of Mrs. Ward or a house servant. These were heavy boots, moving with deliberate stealth up the back stairs. Isiah pressed himself deeper into the shadows of the hallway, watching as a figure moved toward the master bedroom. The unmistakable silhouette of Deputy Silas Pike appeared at the end of the corridor. The deputy paused, glancing quickly around before approaching the bedroom door. His movements were furtive, a man accustomed to sneaking through other people's houses. He pushed the door open wider and slipped inside. Isiah held his breath, counting the seconds. 1, 2, 3. A sharp intake of breath came from the bedroom, the sound of a man confronting something unexpected and terrible. Isiah moved closer to the door, peering through the crack. Inside, Deputy Pike stood frozen at the foot of the bed, staring at the collapsed canopy and the still form beneath it. Blood had begun to seep through the fine linen sheets, staining the expensive fabric a dark crimson. The deputy's face, usually smug with the power his position gave him, now showed shock and calculation. His eyes darted around the room, taking in the scene, assessing the situation. Pike took a step closer to the bed, then stopped as if afraid to contaminate the scene. His hand moved to his gun belt, then dropped away. There was no threat here, only opportunity or danger, depending on how he played his next move. Deputy Pike stepped cautiously toward the bed, his boots leaving faint impressions in the plush carpet. In the dim bedroom, the collapsed canopy cast strange shadows across Ephraim's broken body. Blood darkened the fine sheets, spreading outward like spilled wine. "Well, well," Pike muttered, bending closer to examine the wreckage. "What have we here?" "An accident." His voice carried no shock, only cold assessment. Isiah remained pressed against the wall in the hallway, his breath shallow and controlled. His heart pounded so loudly he feared the deputy might hear it through the partly open door. Pike prodded at a splintered piece of the canopy with his fingertip. "Fine craftsmanship gone to waste," he said, almost appreciatively. "Though I suspect it did exactly what it was meant to do." The deputy straightened up and glanced around the room, his eyes calculating. He moved to the writing desk in the corner where Ephraim kept his business papers. With practiced efficiency, Pike rifled through the drawers until he found what he was looking for: a leather-bound ledger with gold trim. "The money tells the real story, doesn't it?" Pike murmured to himself as he flipped through the pages. "And what a story this is!" He tucked the ledger inside his coat. He continued searching, finding a smaller notebook in the desk's secret compartment. After scanning its contents, his face broke into a satisfied smirk. This, too, disappeared into his coat. Isiah's fingers gripped the doorframe. He hadn't anticipated this, the deputy stealing evidence before anyone else discovered the body. Was this good or bad for his plan? He couldn't tell yet. Pike returned to the bed for one final look. "What an unfortunate accident," he said, his voice dripping with false concern. Poor Ephraim never could resist showing off, could he? Now, look where it got him. The deputy's boots left faint bloody prints as he backed away from the bed. He straightened his coat, adjusting the hidden ledgers, and glanced toward the door. Isiah quickly withdrew deeper into the shadows. Pike moved toward the hallway door, then paused, reconsidering. He turned instead toward the servants' stairs at the back of the room. "Best not to be seen," he muttered. "Not tonight." Isiah pressed himself against the wall as Pike slipped through the bedroom toward the back stairs. The deputy moved with the confidence of a man who knew the house's layout well. Too well for someone who shouldn't be there at all. As Pike disappeared down the back stairs, Isiah released the breath he'd been holding. The deputy was heading toward the kitchen door, the one used by servants and, evidently, for clandestine midnight visits. From upstairs, the soft sound of movement caught Isiah's attention. Mrs. Ward was stirring in her separate bedroom. Soon she would check on her husband, as was her custom before retiring fully for the night. Isiah slipped away from the master bedroom, moving silently down the hallway toward the main stairs. He needed to be far from here when the mistress discovered her husband's body. The plan had changed now. Pike had the ledgers, evidence that might point to the truth or might be used for the deputy's own purposes. As Isiah reached the bottom of the stairs, he heard Mrs. Ward's door open upstairs. He quickened his pace, slipping out the side door into the warm night air. The distant sound of crickets and frogs created a wall of noise that masked his footsteps as he made his way across the grounds toward the slave quarters. He forced himself to walk at a normal pace once he was in view of others. A few people sat outside their cabins, seeking relief from the stuffy indoor heat. Isiah nodded to them casually, betraying nothing of what had just happened in the big house. "Isiah," called old Tom from his usual spot. "Come play a game before sleep." Isiah joined the old man at his checkerboard, grateful for the alibi. They had just set up the pieces when a scream tore through the night, high and piercing from the direction of the main house. Mrs. Ward had found her husband. "Lord, have mercy," Tom whispered, looking toward the house. "What's happening up there?" "I don't know," Isiah lied, moving his checker piece forward. "Your move." Hours later, after the house had erupted into chaos and settled again, Sister Miriam appeared at Isiah's cabin door. Her face was grave, her eyes alert for watchers. "Come with me," she whispered. "Quickly now." Isiah followed her through the darkness, past the overseer's cabin where lights still burned as plans were made for the morning. They slipped into the nursery building, a small structure where enslaved children stayed while their mothers worked in the fields. Inside, Miriam closed the door and lit a small candle. The sleeping children didn't stir, accustomed to people moving about at all hours. "You did it," she said simply, studying Isiah's face. It wasn't a question. Isiah didn't answer. He didn't need to. Miriam nodded slowly. "Come. There's something you need to see." She led him to the corner of the room and carefully lifted a floorboard that looked no different from the others. Beneath it was a shallow space, hardly deeper than a finger's width. "Look," she instructed, holding the candle closer. Isiah knelt down, peering into the hidden space. Carved into the underside of the floorboards were names, dozens of them, with dates and brief notations beside each. "Our record," Miriam explained quietly. "Every soul that passed through this plantation, births, deaths, sales, the history they don't want written down." Isiah ran his fingers over the shallow carvings, recognizing names of people long gone. Then his hand froze as he found one particular name, Rebecca Cole, his wife. Beside it was carved, "Sold to cover mortgage, 1847. "She was sold to pay Ephraim's debts," Miriam said gently, "just like 20 others before her." Isiah's throat tightened. He had known his wife was sold because of money, but seeing it carved here, part of a pattern, a business practice, made his blood run cold. Miriam placed a weathered hand on his shoulder. "The banker who holds Ephraim's notes. I've seen him when he visits. His face is red. His breath comes hard. He won't last the year." She looked directly into Isiah's eyes. "And when he falls, wolves circle. Remember that." Isiah nodded, understanding her warning. Ephraim's death was just the beginning. What would follow could be worse, or it could be an opportunity. It all depended on what happened next and how carefully he played his hand. Dawn broke over the plantation in streaks of orange and pink. The house buzzed with hushed whispers and hurried footsteps. Word had spread quickly. The master was dead, killed in his bed by a collapsing canopy. Isiah stood in the doorway of the workshop, watching as Mrs. Ward crossed the yard toward him. Her face was pale, her hair hastily pinned beneath a black cap. Despite the early hour, she wore a dark dress with buttons fastened to her throat. "Isiah," she called, her voice sharper than usual. "Come with me. Now." He followed her across the yard and up the steps to the main house. Servants darted out of their way, eyes downcast. No one wanted to be noticed this morning. In the master bedroom, sheets had been pulled over Ephraim's body, but blood had seeped through in places. The broken canopy hung at odd angles, wood splintered and fabric torn. Mrs. Ward's hands trembled slightly, but her voice remained steady. "The banker is coming this afternoon. Mr. Harrison needs to see that this was nothing more than a terrible accident." Isiah nodded, keeping his face carefully blank. "You will repair this," she continued, gesturing at the canopy. "Make it look presentable. Remove the—" she swallowed hard. "Remove the body to the ice house, then fix this frame so anyone can see it was simply poorly made wood that failed." "Yes, ma'am," Isiah said. "No one must think there is any reason to question our stability," she added, her eyes suddenly sharp. "The estate's reputation must survive. Do you understand? There must be no scandal." Isiah understood perfectly. Scandal meant investigation. Investigation meant potential discovery. And discovery would end with him swinging from a tree. "I'll need Jonah to help me," he said. "Take whoever you need. Just make this right before Mr. Harrison arrives." Mrs. Ward left him alone with the dead body of her husband. Isiah stood for a moment, looking at the ruin of his handiwork. Then he set to work. He and Jonah carefully removed Ephraim's body, wrapping it in the bloodied sheets. They carried it down the back stairs to the ice house, where it would remain until the coffin was ready. The house slaves whispered as they passed, making signs to ward off evil. Back in the bedroom, Isiah examined the broken canopy frame. Now came the delicate part of his plan. He needed to make the collapse look like an accident. Specifically, an accident caused by faulty materials. "Hand me that saw," he instructed Jonah, "and bring me the cypress planks from the shed." The young man hurried to obey. When he returned, Isiah carefully selected certain pieces. "Watch closely," he murmured to Jonah. "I'm going to make it look like the wood was rotten. From Beaumont's mill." Beaumont was Ephraim's rival, owner of a competing lumber mill across the parish. Their feud was well known. Isiah worked methodically, inserting pieces of wood with deliberate flaws. He doctored the breaks, making them appear natural. He planted tiny wormholes in strategic spots. To the untrained eye, it would look as if poor-quality lumber had given way under Ephraim's weight. "The pin mechanism, too," Isiah said quietly. "It needs to look like it was poorly cast, weak metal that snapped under pressure." As they worked, Isiah felt eyes on him. He glanced toward the window and saw Deputy Pike standing on the veranda, watching. The deputy leaned against a column, toothpick between his teeth, his eyes never leaving Isiah's hands. Pike made no move to enter, content to observe from a distance. When Isiah met his gaze, the deputy's mouth curved into a knowing smirk. He patted his coat pocket, where Ephraim's ledgers were hidden, and nodded slightly. The message was clear. Pike knew the truth, or suspected it. And he was keeping that knowledge in reserve, to use when it suited him best. Isiah turned back to his work, his face betraying nothing. By midday, the bedroom was transformed. The broken canopy had been repaired, the bloodstains scrubbed from the floor. Only the faintest smell of iron remained, masked by burning herbs in a ceramic dish. The banker, Mr. Harrison, arrived promptly at 3 o'clock. He was a frail man, with wispy gray hair and watery eyes. His face flushed red with the slightest exertion, and he wheezed as he climbed the front steps. Isiah watched from the workshop as Mrs. Ward greeted him, dressed in full mourning black. Her hand gestures were animated as she explained the tragic accident. The banker nodded repeatedly, occasionally glancing toward the main bedroom window. Pike remained on the property throughout the day, speaking briefly with the banker before riding off. Each time he passed the workshop, He slowed his horse, eyes lingering on Isiah with that same knowing smirk. Evening fell on the quarters with unusual quiet. No one sang. No one played the fiddle or banjo. People spoke in hushed tones, uncertain what Ephraim's death might mean for them. Isiah sat outside his cabin, whittling a small piece of wood. The repetitive motion calmed his mind, helped him think through what would come next. Jonah approached, sitting beside him on the rough bench. For a while, they said nothing, listening to the chorus of crickets and frogs from the nearby creek. "We should run," Jonah finally whispered. "Tonight, the master's dead. Everyone's confused. We could be halfway to the north before they get organized." Isiah kept whittling, the small curls of wood falling between his feet. "And leave everyone else behind? To face whatever comes next?" "We could take others," Jonah insisted, his voice rising slightly. "Start a rebellion, right now, while they're weak." "And how many would die?" Isiah asked quietly. "Pike would call in men from every plantation in the parish. They'd hunt us down with dogs. You know what happens then?" Jonah's fists clenched. "So we just keep waiting? Keep suffering? You killed the master, Isiah. You proved it can be done. Why stop there?" Isiah glanced around, making sure no one could overhear. "Because killing one man is not the same as killing a system. We have to be smarter than that." Sister Miriam approached from the shadows, her familiar shape silhouetted against the stars. She lowered herself onto the bench beside them, her joints creaking softly. "The boy has fire," she said, nodding toward Jonah. "Fire has its place, but fire burns everyone, guilty and innocent alike." Jonah started to protest, but Miriam raised her hand. "I've lived longer than both of you combined. I've seen rebellions. I've seen what follows." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Miriam turned to Isiah. "If you can kill with craft," she said slowly, "you can also free with it." Isiah looked up from his whittling, meeting her steady gaze. "The master is dead, but his debts live on," she continued. "That banker who came today, his breath is short, his time shorter. What comes after him matters more than what happened yesterday." Isiah nodded slowly, understanding her meaning. Freedom might come not through open revolt, but through the careful manipulation of debts, ledgers, and laws, the very tools used to enslave them. Around them, the quarters settled into uneasy sleep. But in several cabins, lanterns burned late into the night as people whispered, planned, and waited to see what the new day would bring. Morning broke over the plantation with unusual quiet. No overseer's horn blared to wake field hands. Without Ephraim to drive the day's labor, the property seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Isiah worked in the stable, mending a broken stall door. His mind was elsewhere, calculating time. Parish law required 60 days' notice before an estate auction. 2 months, if they were lucky, before everything changed. "Isiah," the soft voice startled him. He turned to find Constance Hale standing in the stable doorway, a basket of mending balanced on her hip. The young seamstress worked for several plantations in the parish, traveling between them with her needle and thread. "Mrs. Ward wants these curtains rehung," she said loudly, glancing toward the house. Then she stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Take this, quickly." She pressed a folded dress into his hands. To anyone watching, it would appear she was showing him damaged fabric that needed repair. "The hem," she whispered. "Look at the hem when you're alone." Isiah nodded slightly, tucking the dress under his workbench. Constance stepped back, raising her voice again. "I'll return for it tomorrow, then." She walked briskly toward the main house, her back straight, her manner properly deferential as she passed Mrs. Ward on the veranda. Isiah waited until midday, when most people were occupied with their meals. He slipped into the empty workshop, closed the door, and carefully examined the dress Constance had given him. The hem had been partially opened and re-sewn. Inside, tucked between layers of fabric, he found a folded paper. He recognized it immediately, the letterhead of Harrison Bank and Trust. The note was brief, written in a shaky hand. Ward estate mortgage overdue 8 months. Total debt exceeds $3,800. Auction proceedings to commence upon death. Full inventory required. Below this official text, someone had added in a different hand, likely Constance's. If scandal erupts, everything liquidated separately. If clean transfer, whole estate may be sold intact. Isiah read the words 3 times. The meaning was clear. If Ephraim's death appeared suspicious, if rumors of murder spread, the bank would break up the entire estate. Land, livestock, furnishings, and people. Everyone would be sold separately to maximize profit. But if Ephraim's death remained an accident, if the estate's reputation stayed intact, there was a chance everyone might be sold together to a new owner. He carefully folded the paper and tucked it inside his shirt. Then he sought out Sister Miriam. "We need to make this place look worthless," Miriam said. The 3 of them, Isiah, Miriam, and Constance, had gathered in the root cellar beneath the kitchen garden. The dim space smelled of earth and onions, but it was one of the few places they could speak freely. Constance nodded. "The widow Blackwood is looking to expand. Her farm borders the south pasture." "Blackwood?" Isiah asked. "I've heard she pays wages to some of her people." "Not wages exactly," Constance corrected, "but she offers contracts. 5 years' labor earns papers. She's already freed 3 of her house servants." Miriam looked skeptical. "Why would she buy this place if we make it look worthless?" "Because of location," Constance explained. "Her land needs water access. This property has the creek. She'd buy it even if the books looked bad." Isiah considered this. "So we need to devalue the estate on paper, but not in reality." Miriam's eyes gleamed with understanding. "The livestock records. I can change the brand marks in the ledger, make it seem like we have fewer cattle than we do. And I can alter inventory lists," Constance added. "Report damaged linens, missing silverware." Isiah nodded slowly. "I'll prepare false production records, show the sawmill's output declining, suggest timber disease spreading in the pine stands." They worked quickly over the next days, each making subtle changes to their areas of responsibility. Isiah doctored wooden tally boards used to track lumber production, carving new numbers to replace the old. Miriam altered livestock birth records, hiding the true size of the herds. Constance quietly removed items from the house inventory, hiding them where they wouldn't be found during assessment. When the banker's clerk arrived to begin the estate valuation, he found a property that appeared to be failing. His reports back to the bank painted a picture of declining value, a burden rather than an asset. Word spread through carefully whispered conversations that the widow Blackwood had expressed interest. Her steward had ridden over to walk the boundaries. A price was mentioned, far below the estate's true worth. Hope, so long absent from the quarters, began to flicker to life. As dusk fell 3 days later, something unusual happened. People emerged from their cabins, gathering around cooking fires in small groups. They spoke in low voices, not about work or pain or punishment, but about possibility. "My Mary and little John might stay together," whispered an older woman, tears in her eyes. "Might not be sold away after all." "Widow Blackwood don't split families," another added. "That's what they say." "My boy could learn blacksmithing proper," a field hand said. "Her smith is free and takes apprentices." Isiah moved between the groups, saying little but listening intently. For the first time in years, he heard people speaking children's names aloud, not in warning to behave, but in hope for futures that might unfold. Constance found him near the edge of the quarters. "It's working," she whispered. "The banker sent word. He's considering the widow's offer. Says it might be easier than arranging a public auction." Isiah allowed himself a small nod. "We're not free yet." "No," she agreed. "But we might stay together." "That's something." As they talked, Isiah noticed Jonah sitting apart from the others, his back against a tree stump. The young man was hunched over something in his lap, a piece of scrap iron he was methodically sharpening against a stone. "He doesn't share our hope," Constance observed. "Hope burns differently in different hearts," Isiah replied. They approached Jonah, who barely looked up from his work. The metal made a soft scraping sound against the stone as he worked its edge. "You should join the others," Isiah said quietly. Jonah's hands never stopped moving. "They're fools if they think changing numbers in a book will save us." "It might keep families together," Constance offered. "For how long?" Jonah's voice was bitter. "Until the next master decides differently? Until the next debt? Your quiet tricks can't save us all, Isiah." Isiah crouched beside him. "What would you have us do? Run? Fight? Die?" "At least we'd die standing up," Jonah muttered. His eyes lifted to the main house, where lanterns glowed in the windows. "At least they'd remember us." Isiah placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. "There's more than one way to fight." But Jonah shrugged off his touch, returning to his sharpening. The metal gleamed in the firelight, its edge growing keener with each pass of the stone. Isiah and Constance walked back toward the others, leaving Jonah to his solitary vigil. Behind them, the soft scraping continued, a counterpoint to the whispered hopes around the cooking fires. The weight of hope in the quarters had grown palpable. With each passing day, as the widow Blackwood's interest in the property solidified, Isiah felt the pressure of protecting what they'd carefully engineered. Every falsified record, every altered inventory list, each deception was a delicate thread in their web of survival. 3 days after the gathering at the cooking fires, Isiah was inspecting the gin house for repairs when a shadow fell across the doorway. "Fine day for carpentry, ain't it?" Deputy Pike's voice carried the false cheer of a predator playing with its prey. Isiah straightened slowly, keeping his face carefully neutral. "Deputy? Didn't expect to see you today." Pike strolled into the gin house, running his fingers along the cotton press. His boots left dusty marks on the clean-swept floor. "Been keeping busy since the unfortunate accident," Pike said, emphasizing the last word with a smirk. "Going through some paperwork. Found some mighty interesting reading." From inside his coat, Pike produced a leather-bound book that made Isiah's blood run cold. The estate ledger, Ephraim's personal accounts, thought to have disappeared the night of his death. "Strange thing about ledgers," Pike continued, flipping through the pages with deliberate slowness. "They tell stories, like this one here." He turned the book toward Isiah. There, in neat columns, were entries for lumber purchases, specifically the exact dimensions of wood Isiah had used for the canopy bed. Next to them were notations for metal spikes, cord, and other materials that matched, piece by piece, the components of Isiah's deadly trap. "Now, I ain't no carpenter," Pike drawled, "but these measurements look mighty specific for just a fancy bed frame." Isiah's mind raced. He kept his breathing steady, his face impassive, even as panic clawed at his insides. "Master Ward was particular about his furnishing," he said flatly. Pike's smile widened. "Particular enough to draw up plans for his own death trap? I don't think so." He snapped the book shut. "I've been watching you, Isiah. Smart man like you, always thinking, always planning. Too smart for your own good." The deputy moved closer, lowering his voice. "I could take this book to the magistrate today. By sundown, you'd be swinging from the oak behind the courthouse." Isiah remained still, his eyes fixed on Pike. "What do you want?" "That's more like it." Pike nodded, satisfied. "Simple exchange. I need Jonah." "Jonah?" Isiah felt a chill. "What for?" "Bounty from the Prescott plantation. They lost 3 field hands last month, offering $40 a head for their return." "That boy knows the swamp paths, has kin over that way." Pike tapped the ledger. "You give me Jonah to lead me to them, this book disappears. Everyone's happy." Isiah heard a faint sound behind him. A sharp intake of breath quickly stifled. Jonah was in the back of the gin house, hidden among the cotton bales. "Jonah hasn't done anything," Isiah said, speaking loudly enough to warn the young man to stay hidden. "He's just a boy learning his trade." Pike laughed. "Boy's a troublemaker. I've seen how he looks at white folk. Besides, I ain't asking him to do anything wrong. Just help the law catch some runaways." He patted the ledger. "Small price to pay for your neck, I'd say." Isiah took a deliberate step sideways, positioning himself to block Pike's view of the back room. "And if I refuse?" Pike's smile vanished. "Then I start asking questions about Ephraim Ward's unfortunate accident. I wonder how many will hang alongside you when it all comes out. The old woman, Miriam? That seamstress who visits too often? How many lives you willing to sacrifice for one stubborn boy?" The threat hung in the air between them. Isiah felt time stretching thin, like thread about to snap. "I need to think," he said finally. "You got until tomorrow night," Pike replied, tucking the ledger back inside his coat. "Bring the boy to the crossroads after dark, or I bring this book to the magistrate." He tipped his hat mockingly. "Choose wisely, Carpenter." As Pike's footsteps faded, Isiah heard movement behind him. Jonah emerged from the shadows, his face tight with anger. "You ain't handing me over," he hissed, fists clenched at his sides. "No, I'm not," Isiah agreed quietly. "They'll never stop," Jonah said, pacing the narrow space. "Even if we change all the numbers, fake all the records, they'll just find new ways to use us. We need to make them remember us." He grabbed a cotton bale and dragged it toward the center of the gin house. "One spark, right here. The whole place goes up. They'll notice that." Isiah gripped the younger man's arm. "And they'll blame every soul in the quarters. You want children whipped? People sold downriver because you needed to make a statement? Then what?" Jonah demanded, pulling away. "Hand me over? Let Pike hunt down those who got away? That's your plan?" Isiah stared out the gin house doorway, toward the main house where Mrs. Ward was entertaining the banker's representative, so close to securing the quiet transfer they needed. "No," he said finally. "I have something Pike wants more than you." "What's that?" "Information. The rival mill, Holloway's, has been dodging timber taxes for years. Ephraim knew it, but kept it quiet as leverage." Jonah looked skeptical. "How's that help us? Pike cares about money, not justice. $40 for runaways is nothing compared to what he could squeeze from Holloway for looking the other way on tax fraud." Isiah sat on a crate, drawing Jonah down beside him. "But we need proof. Something Pike can use to threaten Holloway with, the same way he's threatening us now. And where do we get this proof? We make it," Isiah said simply. That night, by the dim light of a covered lamp, Isiah worked in his carpentry shed. He constructed a false crate with a hidden compartment in its base. Inside, he placed doctored receipts and shipment records, some genuine papers salvaged from the main house, others carefully forged. Together, they told a compelling story of systematic tax evasion at the Holloway mill. Jonah watched, still unconvinced. "You think Pike will just take this and forget about us?" "Pike will take what brings him the most profit with the least risk," Isiah explained, fitting the false bottom into place. "Our job is to make sure this seems more valuable than turning us in." He sealed the crate and set it aside, then turned to face Jonah directly. "Listen to me," he said, his voice low and urgent. "I understand your anger. I feel it too, burning in my chest every day. But right now, patience is our only shield. We can't outfight them, but we can outthink them." Jonah's shoulders sagged slightly. "How long can we keep playing these games?" Isiah placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. "Long enough to see our people safe. Long enough to keep the families together. One day at a time." Outside, an owl called into the darkness. Tomorrow would bring another dangerous bargain, another calculated risk. But, for tonight, the quarters slept, still clinging to their fragile hope. A week had passed since Isaiah's bargain with Pike. The deputy had accepted the false crate eagerly, believing he'd found a more profitable scheme than turning in runaways. The tension in the quarters had eased slightly, though Isiah still caught Jonah's brooding glances across the workshop. But peace, Isiah knew, was as fragile as dried cotton waiting for a spark. The dawn came gray and misty. Isiah woke to the smell first, acrid smoke cutting through the cool morning air. Then came the sound, a distant roar that grew louder with each passing second. He threw open his cabin door and saw the orange glow lighting the sky. The gin house was burning. Flames leapt from the roof, devouring the weathered boards. Dark smoke billowed upward, staining the pale dawn sky. Isiah's heart sank as he scanned the chaos for Jonah. The quarters bell began to ring frantically. People poured from cabins, some rushing for water buckets, others frozen in terror. Children cried as mothers gathered them close. Old Tom, who rang the bell each morning, now pulled the rope with desperate urgency. "Fire! Fire at the gin!" voices shouted. Isiah pushed through the crowd, moving against the tide of bodies. "Jonah!" he called, searching faces. "Has anyone seen Jonah?" Sister Miriam appeared at his side, clutching her shawl tight around her shoulders. "He's not in his cabin," she said, her voice tight with worry. "Isiah, what's happening?" Before he could answer, the thunder of hooves filled the air. Riders approached from the main house, the overseer, 2 field bosses, and 3 neighboring men with rifles. Behind them came Deputy Pike, his face twisted in a grim smile. "Get everyone lined up!" shouted the overseer, cracking his whip above their heads. "Now!" The people of the quarters formed ragged lines, fear evident in their faces. The gin house continued to burn, but no one moved to fight the fire now. The flames had grown too large, too hungry. Pike dismounted, handing his reins to one of the armed men. His eyes found Isiah immediately. "Well, well," he said, walking toward him with deliberate slowness. "Quite a sight, ain't it? All that cotton gone up in smoke, right when the widow Blackwood was set to make her offer on the place." Isiah kept his face neutral, though his mind raced. "A terrible accident," he said. Pike laughed. "Accident? No, sir. This was deliberate." He turned to address the gathered enslaved people and white men alike. "This was planned. Planned by the same man who arranged his master's death." A gasp rippled through the crowd. The overseer stepped forward, his hand on his pistol. "What are you saying, deputy?" Pike pointed directly at Isiah. "This man, this Carpenter, he built a death trap for Master Ward, made it look like an accident, and now he's burned the gin house to cripple the estate." "That's not true," Isiah said firmly. "I had nothing to do with this." "Then where's your apprentice?" Pike demanded. "Where's that hot-headed boy who's always talking about making statements?" The question hung in the air. No one spoke. Jonah was nowhere to be seen. "Search his cabin," Pike ordered 2 of the men. "You'll find the proof." As they hurried off, Mrs. Ward appeared on the path from the main house, her face pale in the growing light. She wore a hastily donned dress, her hair still in night braids beneath her cap. "My gin," she gasped, staring at the flames. "My cotton. The banker is due tomorrow." Pike moved to her side. "Ma'am, I believe I've found your saboteur, the same man who may have had a hand in your husband's tragic accident." Mrs. Ward's eyes narrowed as she looked at Isiah. Her hand pressed against her chest, where her palpitations troubled her. "The Carpenter? But he's been so—" Her voice trailed off. "Found this, deputy." One of the men returned from Jonah's cabin, holding a small tin. "Lamp oil and flint, hidden under his pallet." Pike nodded triumphantly. "Just as I thought. The boy did the deed, but who gave the orders?" He turned to Mrs. Ward. "Ma'am, your husband's ledger shows this man designing what became his death trap. And now, with the sale of your property at stake, he strikes again." Mrs. Ward's face hardened. The momentary confusion vanished. replaced by cold calculation. She needed someone to blame, someone to appease the banker, to explain the loss, to preserve what little remained of her standing. "Yes," she said, her voice suddenly firm. "I've noticed him watching, planning, always in the shadows." Isiah felt the trap closing around him, just as surely as the one he'd built for Ephraim Ward. He looked at the faces of his people, Miriam's horror, old Tom's lowered eyes, the children clinging to their mother's skirts. Whatever happened to him now would happen to them all. "Take him," Mrs. Ward ordered, turning away from the sight of Isiah as if he were already dead. Pike grinned, gesturing to the armed men. "Bind his hands. We'll have a reckoning on the veranda." Rough hands grabbed Isaiah's arms, twisting them behind his back. A rope cut into his wrists as they tied him tight. Pike took his shoulder, pushing him toward the main house. "Where's Jonah?" Isiah asked quietly as they walked. "Gone," Pike whispered back. "Ran like a scared rabbit. Don't matter. I got something better now." "I got you." They marched him past the burning gin house, through the kitchen garden, and up to the veranda where Mrs. Ward now sat in a wicker chair, her face composed into a mask of righteous anger. The banker's representative stood nearby, looking disturbed by the morning's events. "This is the man," Pike announced. "Confess now, and perhaps the court will be merciful." Isiah looked at the faces surrounding him, white faces full of fear and anger, desperate for someone to punish. Behind them gathered the house servants, watching with careful blankness that hid their true thoughts. "I wish to say something," Isiah said calmly. "Speak then," Mrs. Ward commanded. "Explain yourself before God and this company." Isiah straightened his shoulders despite his bound hands. "Before I'm judged, I need to show you something in the house, in the master bedroom." Pike frowned. "What trick is this?" "No trick," Isiah replied. "There's evidence there that speaks to the truth, about Master Ward's death, about everything." Mrs. Ward's composed expression flickered. "What nonsense! There's nothing." "Let him show us," interrupted the banker's man, curious now. "If there's evidence to be had, let's see it." Pike hesitated, then nodded sharply. "Fine, but if this is a delay, or some foolishness—" He left the threat unspoken, grabbing Isaiah's arm roughly. "Take me to the bedroom," Isiah said, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. "What I need to show you is there." With a grunt, Pike dragged him through the front door, into the cool darkness of the main house, toward the master bedroom where everything had begun. The master bedroom was silent as Pike shoved Isiah through the doorway. Morning light streamed through the curtains, casting long shadows across the rebuilt canopy bed that dominated the room. Mrs. Ward followed, her face tense. The banker's man and several others crowded behind her. "Well," Pike demanded, "what's this evidence you claim exists?" Isiah stood straight despite his bound hands. "The bed," he said. "The canopy I rebuilt after Master Ward's death." Pike snorted. "We know you built that death trap." "Not a trap," Isiah replied. "A witness." He moved toward the bed, Pike's hand tight on his arm. The deputy kept his other hand on his pistol, clearly expecting some desperate attempt at escape. "Let me show you," Isiah said. "The headboard panel." Mrs. Ward stepped forward. "This is absurd. There's nothing—" "Allow him," the banker's man insisted. "I want to hear this." With a nod from Pike, Isiah knelt awkwardly beside the bed. "The ornamental carving on the right side," he said. "Press the rosette in the center." Pike reached out cautiously and pushed the wooden flower. Nothing happened. "Harder," Isiah instructed. "Then slide it left." Pike pushed again, and this time there was a soft click. The carved panel slid sideways, revealing a hollow space behind it. "What is this?" Mrs. Ward demanded, her voice suddenly thin. "Your prayer nook, ma'am," Isiah said. "The one you requested." Pike reached in and pulled out a small leather-bound book. "A Bible?" "No," Isiah said quietly. "The mistress's prayer journal." Mrs. Ward lunged forward. "Give me that. That's private." The banker's man intercepted her, taking the journal from Pike. "If this contains evidence, as claimed, it's now a matter for investigation." He opened the book, flipping through pages of neat handwriting. His eyes widened as he read. "Mrs. Ward, these entries." He looked up, shock evident on his face. "You wrote that your husband was cruel to you nightly, that you prayed for his death." "Many unhappy wives make such prayers," she said stiffly. "It means nothing. And this entry," the banker continued, "dated the day after his death. The Lord has answered. His accident was his divine hand. I told Isiah to make it look natural." He looked up. "You wrote that you instructed him to cover up your husband's death." The color drained from Mrs. Ward's face. "I never. Those words are taken out of context." Pike grabbed the journal, scanning the pages himself. His face darkened. "You knew," he accused Mrs. Ward. "You made the carpenter fix the bed to hide what happened." "She needed a scapegoat," Isiah said quietly. "First her husband, now me." From outside, a commotion grew. Voices rose in the yard below the window. Pike moved to look out, his hand still gripping the journal. "What now?" he muttered. In the clearing before the house, Sister Miriam stood surrounded by both the people from the quarters and the armed white men. Her voice carried clearly through the morning air as she read from a worn leather ledger. "Sarah, age 16, child Daniel sold to cover gambling debts, 1848. Matthew, age 22, died from whipping, buried without marker, 1850. Bess, age 29, sold downriver to cover mortgage, separated from husband Isiah, 1849. Name after name filled the air, a litany of suffering etched into the hidden history of the plantation. The armed men shifted uncomfortably, rifles lowering as the weight of those lives settled over them. "What is she reading?" the banker's man asked. "The true ledger of this house," Isiah answered. "Every soul bought and sold, every death hidden, every family torn apart." Mrs. Ward sank into a chair, her composure crumbling. "Stop this," she whispered. "Stop it now." Isiah turned to the banker's man. "Sir, I have a proposition, one that benefits everyone." "Speak," the man said, still holding the prayer journal. "Transfer this estate to the widow Blackwood at a discount. The true production figures carved into wooden tiles in the lumber shed show this land can be profitable again under proper management." Isiah met his eyes steadily. "Ephraim Ward's personal ledgers prove he mismanaged everything. The widow will pay fair price, and your bank recovers more than it would at auction." "And what of the fire? The damage?" the banker asked. "The gin house was old. The widow plans to build a steam-powered one regardless." Isiah nodded toward Pike. "Ask the deputy about the bribes he took to overlook the Ward estate's tax problems." Pike's hand moved to his gun, but Constance Hale stepped into the doorway, holding a folded paper. "I have the records," she said quietly. "Copies of every payment made to Deputy Pike, dates and amounts. I sewed them into the hems of Mrs. Ward's dresses for safekeeping." Pike's face twisted with rage. "You little—" "Enough!" The banker raised his hand. "This entire situation has become untenable." He turned to Mrs. Ward. "Madam, your reputation hangs by a thread. Sign the transfer papers to the widow, and this journal never leaves this room." Mrs. Ward looked at the faces surrounding her. The judgment, the calculation, the years of silent watching now turned to open witness. She nodded once, defeated. "Pike," the banker continued, "your bribery, if proven, ends more than your career. Withdraw now, and those records remain private." The deputy's hand fell from his pistol. His eyes met Isiah's with naked hatred, but he stepped back. "Untie him," the banker ordered. As the ropes fell away from his wrists, Isiah stood tall in the room where his vengeance had begun, and his redemption now took shape. Outside, Miriam's voice continued, calling forth the dead and the sold, ensuring they would be remembered in the new story about to unfold. I hope you found that story powerful. Leave a like on the video and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. I have handpicked 2 stories for you that are even more powerful. Have a great day.